Hello, I'm so glad you've joined us for this special edition of the Leadership in Aviation podcast. As you may know, I've been part of a group called the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board. And even though our board sunset when the report was presented to the FAA in March of 2022, the group of women who formed this board are dedicated to bringing about change in the industry. And these special editions are a replay of town halls that we're doing to talk about issues in the workplace in aviation that affect women and what can be done about them. I think you'll find the topics fascinating. This first one is about the behind the scenes of pulling 30 very strong leaders together and coming up with a report with 55 unanimous recommendations, which was an incredible feat. And we're going to talk with the two women who bore most of the weight of putting together the final polished product that you see. So I'd love for you to hear this session and then stay tuned for future town halls. Can't wait for you to hear more about it. Well, hello, I'm so glad you're here for this first town hall meeting. I will be your MC for the day. My name is Renee Bengelsdorf and I served on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. I'll be joined by a couple of my colleagues today who also served on that board. Trish Gilbert and Lauren Haertlein will be joining us. Really excited to dig in and show you a little bit of what behind the scenes looked like as we put together this report. I don't know if any of you know, this board was actually created through the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, and it was supposed to be appointed within 6 months of that October timeframe, but it actually took almost 15 months longer than that before it was appointed. And 30 of us were appointed just 6 weeks after the shutdown of the government and the whole world with the pandemic. So we had some challenges that we had to overcome, and really getting 30 women from very different backgrounds and very different opinions and having them all be leaders was significant, because we came to consensus and had 55 unanimous recommendations over hundreds, I would guess, of Zoom calls over 20 months that we worked on this report. Lauren Haertlein is joining us from Zipline. Trish Gilbert is joining us from her home in Austin, and she is the Executive Vice President of IFACTA. Lauren has just come off of the high of getting Part 135 certification for Zipline. I am so thrilled to have both of you here today, and I can't wait to dig into this topic, the behind the scenes of the writing of the report that was published. Trish, would you kick us off and tell us, kind of from a 30,000 foot level, what it looked like, the timeline looked like for creating the report, and how we overcame some of the obstacles that we did?
You know, it's interesting. I was going through some emails, just trying to refresh my memory, preparing for this webinar today. And the amount of emails that went back and forth, not between the 30 people, but the way we had to target the different people that were taking on the different roles in the writing and editing, is amazing. I just went to look for a couple things, and there are thousands of them. Gave me a little PTSD, I have to say. But you know, in hindsight, you look back, we got through the whole work in 20 months, which is really incredible. It felt like we were running through mud sometimes to try and meet deadlines that we were imposing on ourselves, because we knew how important the work was. So we wanted to get it out there, didn't want to continue to work on it all the time. We could still be working on it. That's how important the issue is. But we knew we had to come to an end and get closure, and then put those important recommendations out for industry and government and leadership to commit to if we're going to see change in the industry. So I would say the 30 voices is, as you mentioned in your opening, all amazing women, and and an incredible leader that we had in chair, Dr. Wilson, trying to get 30 people that are normally all of them in charge, to get them to fall in line and take the lead from other people at different phases of the work. Lauren and I had the honor of, in the end, taking all of the work that the committees had done, the 4 subgroups that we started with, all of the recommendations that we put in and bundled up, and be able to hopefully put it into one voice, which we eventually did, and then put it in a comprehensive report that read well and made sense to the reader, but also emphasized the importance of the work, the significant amount of work that we did in interviews, research, focus groups, surveys, and then give us the history, the background, the reality that we're in, the real data, which was super important, and then what, again, our recommendations were for industry to embrace, to see that needle move, because the data is pretty significant and pretty disappointing in that we have not seen relatively any growth at all in the last 40 to 60 years of the amount of women in leadership roles, for sure, but in the industry as a whole. And so that, was the focus of the work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was an amazing amount of work. I'd love to spend a little bit of time breaking that apart a little bit. And Lauren, do you want to talk about what the 4 subcommittees were and kind of what their roles were, or their jobs were? They got split up and there were topics, and people got to volunteer for which subcommittee they wanted to be on, but all the subcommittees ended up taking a little bit different approach to putting together their research and recommendations. I'd love to, if you feel comfortable doing that, and if not, we can each take a turn adding in which committee we were on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Renee. I think that the enormity of the task before us when we initially convened was what led us to break up the work into subcommittees that that founded sort of the overarching background and need for the work, and then how to look at recommendations from a number of different angles. And that was ultimately what we assembled into that comprehensive report, which presented both a challenge, because as you noted, the subcommittees took some different strategic approaches, but I think also ultimately allowed the recommendations to be really comprehensive and varied in the targets. So the one of the subcommittee that I think now we've all sort of worked together on several ones, the subcommittees sort of dissolved towards the end of the report drafting and came together. But Trish, you and I were both on understanding the problem, right? Yeah. So understanding the problem subcommittee was focused on getting a real comprehensive look at why we have such a significant underrepresentation of women, and what the factors are that attract and also deter women from entering into the aviation industry. And that's what you'll see if you haven't had a chance to read the report. That's what you'll see in reflected in both the our history and the our reality sections of the report, that kind of lay out how we got to where we are today and what today really looks like. And that's what informs broadly having this flight plan for the future model of the current landscape and opportunities for intervention there. Other subcommittees, which we didn't have the chance to serve on, we had a success stories subcommittee. Renee, were you on the success stories?
That was the one that I was on. Yeah.
So you can probably speak to that better than I can, but the heart was to really get a close look at what opportunities had worked to help us inform recommendations in a way that would be practical and creative and leverage lessons and opportunities.
Absolutely. That's what it was. Beth would remind us every time she was the chair of our subcommittee. Every time she would go to a subcommittee chairs meeting, she would come back and say, boy, we have the fun committee because the other committees were really looking at some huge barriers and some obstacles that have been long seated in the industry, and really examining what's at the heart of those, what's upstream from those, what is the thing that's causing this symptom in our industry. And I think what your subcommittee ended up diving into is that there are some cultural issues, that there's a system that's been created that lends itself toward the discrimination and even some of the bias and harassment that occurs in the industry that deters women, and really examining at the root of that what we can do. And it resulted in a lot of work on what we call the barriers timeline. Would you like to talk a little bit about how we ended up coming up with that?
I did want to note the other two subcommittees before and that they're essential to what is reflected in that barriers timeline. There was a mentoring and professional development subcommittee, and that work was really key to understanding where the gaps were, as well as the opportunities for cultural change. You'll see recommendations throughout the report focus on the importance of mentorship, on sponsorship, and having targeted professional development that is thoughtful to the specific situation that women have in entering and remaining in the industry. And then training and recruiting. And one of our fundamental tenets is focused on recruiting, on getting those new voices into the industry, whether they be ab initio, so folks who are coming in, or recruiting women from other professional fields into aviation. So those were the four subcommittees that ultimately resulted in that, in the report itself, as well as the barriers timeline model.
The barriers timeline model, as well as the report, I think early on, our committee, understanding the problem, wanted to do something that made an impact visually to the reader. And that timeline model was developed pretty early on in concept. We evolved it certainly as we moved through writing the report and placing it in the report. And eventually we didn't only use it as a visual, we actually, Lauren, I would say mostly, made sure that the report always referred back to the different aspects of that barrier timeline model. But it was very evident that it was a journey for a woman. It starts at a very young age. The barriers that are in place that may prevent women from, even as a young child, seeking interest in aviation, and then further on as they grow up or go to school, seeking careers. And so we wanted to identify what those barriers were in a visual way. And then on the opposite side of that, we wanted to make sure that our recommendations were solutions for those barriers that are in place for women along their journey from young childhood all the way up into, very, very high level executive leadership positions. And that's what that barrier timeline model does. Our industry is uniquely positioned in that, I wouldn't say just our industry, but it is one that has not evolved as quick as we would like in gender representation, appropriate gender representation. And I think a lot of it is, it was an industry that only had men in it from the very beginning. It was developed by men for men, no fault of their own, but it did not have women involved in a lot of the decision making that has laid the foundation for the way we train, the way we build and engineer our flight decks, our control towers. And so it was really important that those barriers, and that our report as well identified the fact that the system was designed to get what we designed it to do, which was not us women, but back many, many years ago, men, and no fault of their own. How do we change that? Which was kind of the guidelines we used when we tried to pull all of the narratives together and write that report out.
Yeah, I think as we began writing the report, I remember having eye-opening conversations about things that I had no idea were barriers. And I think one of the things that we discovered is how pervasive harassment is in our industry. And I remember Tammy Jo Schultz mentioning to us that the standards for medical exams for pilots had been the same since World War II. And I think it's just something that was shocking to all of us to realize that that's why perhaps there were things going awry, if you will, with medical exams, or women feeling like they had been violated or inappropriate actions happening because they weren't against the rules or outside of the guidelines. They're just inappropriate in the 2020s. And so some of those things were really eye-opening to me. That was one for me. Was there anything else in serving on that committee that surprised either of you?
I would say the data as well. That information came out with a lot of work from other members of our board, and I think we were all taken aback by the significance of, because at that critical point in a woman's journey to become a pilot, air traffic controllers also take those medical exams, and we do have some documented issues around dealing with that inappropriate nature of some of that activity. But I think when you pulled it all together, we were all in our little silos, all 30 of us to some degree. And I think we all knew that things were happening, and that the culture, especially around harassment and sexual or discrimination and sexual harassment, were there. But once we got together and we pulled the data and we shared stories, I think the significance of how pervasive it was across the industry really, I think, set us all back. One of the more significant surveys that we did of women surveyed, 70% had either had been sexual harassed or discriminated against, or seen a coworker or colleague at an aviation workplace or event. And that's a big number. That's a big number. And, I think Lauren can share some other data around some of the things that we were able to pull, because then we also did a couple of different surveys that Lauren headed up of women that aren't in aviation and why they have not pursued careers in aviation.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. That also resonated with me. I think although there were aspects of the story of every one of our stories and the stories that we heard from individuals who generously shared their experiences with the board to help inform the report, there was an aspect of universality amongst the culture issues that it was disheartening and motivating at the same time. And even having lived it, and I've been privileged to have experiences in the industry that have been just very supportive of my career, but even having lived it in circumstances, it was kind of shocking to really see the numbers and really hear the stories. And I think that hopefully all individuals who read the report will find that a call to action. The survey, a couple other things that really surprised me, even though they were consistent with what I knew, was how many women in the industry who have successful careers. So we conducted a survey of professionals, leaders in the industry, and how many of them have considered leaving. More than half of women in those roles have considered leaving. We're going to lose their talent, and they are leaving because of the culture. They are leaving because they are being pushed out. And we compared that to why a lower number of men consider leaving, and they're leaving for better opportunities. They're leaving because they're being drawn to other industries that are offering them something that they're not getting, whereas women are leaving because of what they are experiencing in the industry. I think we also were surprised to learn from the survey of women who aren't in aviation. So we wanted to get a sense, those of us who are living it, we have fairly strong feelings. I think one thing is a lot of folks in aviation are passionate about aviation, and whether that's you're interested in flying, but you don't have to be a pilot. There's just passion for what this industry has achieved and what you can do. so we wanted to look at what the perspectives were of individuals who aren't in. What do they think about aviation? Why isn't it interesting to them, or why is it? And they also perceived the culture as likely unwelcoming to them. And they also had some misconceptions about what qualifications you needed, whether, one that you needed to be good at math to be in an aviation job. And if that's still true, then I probably will be looking for a job very soon. So yeah, so those were some things that really resonated, and the opportunity for individuals to reach out to members of the board and share their experiences was something very, very meaningful.
Renee, and I think I just thought of a segue point that I wanted to make based on what Lauren just said was, the 50% that thought of leaving, considered leaving. One of the other big reasons was family-friendly policies. And as we got really into the later stages of the writing, we did have to facilitate a lot of back and forth with key members of the board to make sure that we could get agreement on the report itself on what we wanted to put in the report. And I think, Renee, you were very key in this as well. Do we want to mandate, family policies, have congressional action? Do we want industry to do the right thing and lead by example and commit to providing better policies that will recruit and retain women in the industry? And so there was a lot of back and forth on exactly how we were going to make that recommendation, how we were going to say it, whether it would be, do the right thing and lead, or was it going to be a mandate? And then there was a whole conversation that went back and forth on maternity leave versus paternity leave and what was our recommendation going to be. Obviously, it's easier for companies just to give, because of so few number of women, just to give maternity leave if they're going to go that way. But we felt strongly after many discussions of several board members that if we're really ever going to see change, we needed to recommend paternity leave, because we needed to change the culture, the larger culture, which mandates, which says that parenting is a joint responsibility. It shouldn't fall disproportionately on the woman if both individuals are working and choose. And that's what happens. And that's why we saw so many women leave during the pandemic, because the caregiving falls disproportionately on them. So that's why we put paternity leave as the recommendation for industry to embrace, to better provide those family-friendly policies, which are going to be key to seeing a more diverse and a more engaged and a more robust workforce.
Yeah, Trish, it was really heated conversations. Sometimes there were a lot of people, probably not heated, but opinionated conversations, because there were a number of people on the board who've experienced the negotiations on the labor union side and have indicated that, look, we don't have the bargaining power because we don't have the numbers of women to push across some of these policies as negotiating points with the labor unions for pilots and air traffic controllers and flight attendants. And so therefore, if we don't mandate it, it's not going to happen. This was significant when they moved to different number of hours to qualify you to fly. It was mandated, and therefore it happened. And so they were coming from that perspective, which as a small business owner, I had no idea about. But as a business owner, I was thinking, oh my goodness, more regulations are usually not good for companies to exist and thrive in. And we were under pretty serious upheaval in the industry with the impact of the pandemic on aviation. And so one of the things that I was talking about as we were discussing this is, how about we show in some form or fashion that companies need this as a competitive advantage? And as I began looking into that and hearing about Disney recruiting fresh airframe and power plant mechanics to come work for them, like the light bulbs went on. We are not going to have enough labor in this industry if we don't begin competing with those family-friendly policies with other industries. It's not just competing with one another, which airline gives better benefits, but we have to look at the outside world and say, oh, this pilot shortage that we're feeling right now, oh, the number of air traffic controllers that we don't have right now, oh, the fact that I have to wait 6 weeks to have my airplane looked at. We have a labor shortage that's going to get worse and worse as other industries begin recruiting people away because they do provide family-friendly policies. So as you can tell, I got pretty passionate about that. And what we ended up doing was weighing all of that and saying, you know what, our job is to make recommendations on what needs to be done and not necessarily on how everyone's going to execute on this. So drawing attention to the fact that this is a competitive advantage for the companies that choose to do it and for the industries that choose to do it, hopefully will spur people on to having those conversations. And I think now with the labor shortage that we're facing, it's an opportune time to bring that back up. Sorry for my soapbox,
No,
girls.
that's good. I mean, and I read this week, United just agreed to a contract with ALPA on 8 weeks of maternity leave for United pilots. So if I read that correctly, that is moving forward. So that's a good start for our industry. Air traffic control is different. We ended up as government employees, while we negotiated at the negotiating table, we could not get it there. We ended up going and talking to Congress for many, many years in a row. And eventually the civilian workforce, civil servants were able to get 12 weeks of paid parental leave. So that's in place now. Just scratching the surface for our country. We're as noted in our report, we're far, far behind many other countries. It's almost embarrassing, but we keep talking about it as being significantly important. And I think industry is starting to see that as a whole and trying to figure out creative ways to make it happen.
I think you'll see that flexibility formulation in a lot of the recommendations. Some of them may feel not as specific in the implementation instructions as they could be. And that was a deliberate choice because we were trying to strike a balance on the subjects that you just noted on making them specific enough to advance them and indeed, where possible, incentivize and encourage the implementation of them, but flexible enough to allow different stakeholders or structures to take up the mantle if appropriate for that one, so that we weren't drafting in a way that some external factor or impediment to the specific plan that we laid out would ultimately make it impossible for it to be carried forward. We wanted to sort of highlight what the fundamental purpose of that recommendation was and what the vision for the implementation was, but not hinder creativity in bringing it forward when possible. So I think that was a really difficult balance and will be a challenge for ensuring that we're able to continue support and focus on achieving them. Since you both have heard me say several times, my nightmare is that this is only a report. And I hope that with the actions we've already seen, that is already not its fate. But my nightmare is that we spent this amount of time putting this together and someone takes it and puts it on their desk and says, I helped make a difference. And, you know, it's only the beginning of the work.
Yeah. And key in developing and writing that report, we talked about the barriers timeline and the importance of the visual, identifying the barriers, providing the solutions via the recommendations, being maybe sometimes not too specific or controversial in the recommendations, but pushing towards that leadership commitment. I think we knew very clearly for it not to become a report that just got put on a shelf, we needed to identify in the report itself why is it important to you? Why is it important to the reader, the industry, the leaders that are making decisions? And how does it affect safety? And we were very clear in the report and our work in backing up all of the things that we said in the report and all that we know, and tie it to what we believe is the number one issue and the number one priority in aviation, which is safety. And so that report took the time to talk about safety, to talk about how this impacts safety, and then to talk about why it matters to industry. The case has been made study after study that it increases sustainability, profitability, innovation, and it's safer when you have a workforce that is diverse in thinking, in backgrounds, in experience, and fully engaged. And that's the tie-in. And we wanted to make sure that we were very clear in that, so it wouldn't just become a report of recommendations that, that was it and it got put on a shelf.
That deserves a shout out to Dr. Becky Ludy in ensuring that all of our sources were, you'll notice the heavy footnoting throughout the report. So we were careful to substantiate and provide data for the arguments that that really are pretty obvious when you spend time to think about them. But if they're not, there's lots of data.
I'm reminded, talking about Dr. Ludy and the footnoting and all of the research that went into this, as we were guests of Southwest Airlines and had kind of a writing workshop with a substantial number of women who were on the board. Dr. Wilson, who was the chair of the board, indicating that we should put all of the recommendations into buckets. And that's how they were handed over to the two of you to begin the writing and the assembly. You had pages and pages and pages of digital documents and research. You had physical printed copies of recruiting, advancement, retention, and data buckets, if you will, to incorporate into a cohesive report. That would have been a nightmare for most of the people who are watching or listening to this. What did you do with the buckets and the files and the SharePoint and the team site? And how did you begin to make sense of the task that you had at hand?
Well, I just want to start with saying that I love writing, and I just feel very grateful, not just for the opportunity to have had the chance to try to assemble that, but I found working with Trish so easy and so harmonious. I hope you felt this way, Trish. I just felt like we were able to divide up. I'm going to look at this. Can you look at this? And can you synthesize what I came up with here? That initial task was a bit overwhelming at first. I like to write with physical. I'm still a pen and paper person. So I think there were piles of recommendations around the floor on our room. What we knew we needed to do from the tasking from the board was, the buckets were a tool to make something that was easily digestible to the best of our ability. So we needed to synthesize this information in a way that had thematic elements that you would carry forward when you read them. There's several recommendations, but how do they fit into the bigger picture? Why are these important? That's the purpose of the buckets. They're not they're just a tool. We understand that they overlap, the different categories overlap. So keeping that in mind as we tried to figure out what the mapping forward looked like, how did the whole story get told through the buckets? How did they relate to the fundamental theme of what this did for the industry and why it needed to happen and how it was happening, was key to reorganizing that. And then there was a lot of cut and paste and late night texts over where things should be organized, and many drafts and track changes.
I think we broke SharePoint at one time. We joked. I'm pretty sure we did break SharePoint at one point. And then you're trying. We weren't we were doing the editing, pulling the report together and the back and forth. And the greatest part about it, it seemed like if one of us was buried with something else for 2, 3, 4 days and couldn't look at it, the other happened to have that time available that they could spend on it. So that back and forth was very helpful. I don't know how Lauren did it. I think she changed jobs right in the middle of it. I would have, I don't know how she did that. So, but she did. And she could still edit anything that, even if it's perfect, she could still edit it again, which is amazing to me, which I also like to write. And I actually like to edit more than I like to write, but I felt very honored to be able to work with Lauren. And I did find her really that, I think we made a good team, and we got it done. And I'm very proud of the report. I would go back to our May 2021 public meeting when we did the PowerPoints and we categorized, we bucketed in 9 categories at that point before the Dallas meeting. And we knew we couldn't write a report with 9 different categories, but we had to start pulling them together because we had hundreds of recommendations. And we knew we couldn't put a report out with hundreds. We ended up with 55, which was still a lot, but that was after consolidating and talking through and making sure we didn't drop anything out. And then even after we had the Dallas meeting and we agreed to the recruitment, retention, and advancement and data, those 4 buckets, we ended up coming up late in the stage. I emailed Lauren, I said, we need one more category to place our reports because we need leadership commitment to an inclusive culture. And there's just some things that are so big that we don't do them service by putting it in recruitment, retention, or advancement. And so we created that first category, which was leadership commitment, where we put some of the overarching things, and we ended up with really kind of 5 buckets, but they were smaller as you went down the line. As you well know, as the first writer, you, Renee, for advancement, a lot of the recommendations that initially went into advancement moved up because as soon as you hit it in recruitment, it helps down the line. It's a domino effect to retaining women and then advancing women. So it was interesting how that all worked out and the evolution of where we ended up moving things in the report to make sure we captured everything. And then we had such talented women on the board that could get fresh eyes on it and say, we're missing this. I think of Pam and Jean specifically catching things that, and Crystal and Elise, and that were just, and we pushed it. Look, what are we missing? Anything? Is there a gap? And then we came out with the mental health piece that we added to commitment, leadership commitment, and more around the responsibility and the leadership in labor unions and the dynamics that occur at the negotiating table. And then some of the data pieces that got left out, not inadvertently, but we just wanted to make sure got captured. So a lot of good eyes on it to keep us, making sure that the report was all encompassing and we didn't leave something out.
Well, one thing that I noticed that you two did an exceptional job of, and Amy Spowert pitched in and did the same thing, was making sure that no one felt like their voice wasn't heard. And I know that added layers and layers of complexity to putting the report together, but you two did a pretty exceptional job of doing that. Will you talk a little bit about the heart behind that? Because I think it's really important.
Without getting emotional on this, I can't tell you what being a part of this work and working with the board meant to me. And I think a lot of us have reflected that we had these moments, but I in particular, having come from a different industry, not having the depth of experience, often felt, what am I doing here now? And how am I so lucky to get to work with these experts? And so I don't think there was any path forward that didn't have trying to leverage to the best of our ability the voices and the knowledge and the creativity and the generosity of every member in making sure that the recommendations reflected their knowledge and their visions. And so, that actually made the whole process, besides the complexity of synthesizing, which everybody was very patient and generous on, really easy, because everyone shared their creativity and their writing talents and their thoughts on how to make this come together. I think that was actually, despite the challenges of us all trying to navigate, being apart from each other during this time and communicating on all the different mechanisms, that was actually one of the most enjoyable parts, was ensuring that that there was input from the entire board to the best of our ability, because it was just a privilege to be a part of this team.
I agree. It was a high priority, and we talked about it often, was we'd almost start to feel a little uncomfortable if we felt like we were making the decision in editing or writing. And those Friday morning meetings that we were having allowed us to share our thoughts, concerns, and get more feedback, and we adjusted, or we felt more confident in moving in the direction we were moving in by having those Friday morning meetings, because it was really important for all of us to have that voice. And again, it was an honor to be a part of it and work and get to know so many great women that I would not have met otherwise, and learn more about the industry that I've spent more than 30 years in, that things I didn't know, and things that have made me, appreciate the industry more. And I've grown as an individual. I haven't shared it with many other people, but because of the people I've met and the encouragement I've got here, I started flying lessons about a month ago. And so soon, next year, not this year, I'll be going to Oshkosh. We'll be, with some of you to convey our report and our recommendations. But next year, I'll be flying probably only to Appleton. My husband's taking lessons with me too. So we'll be flying, we're looking for a plane, and we'll be flying to Appleton and enjoy the event next year, the two of us as pilots.
Oh my goodness, Trish, I'm so excited.
And that's because of you encouraged me, both of you specifically.
Renee,
oh, that's fantastic.
Renee, you became a pilot during this time.
Yes,
I did. One of the board members, Laura Jones, almost shamed me into it. She invited me to come and see truly the success story that she's living in Louisville, Kentucky. She has Flight Club 502. I'm like getting my area codes mixed up, but 502. And she's taken more than 80 kids through getting their private pilot's license free of charge. They volunteer their time in order to be able to do that. And so she came and picked me up in her Cirrus and talked me into it. I took a sabbatical last May. I think my hair was probably falling out when we had that public meeting in May of 2021. And really did it in a month, got my private pilot's license in a month. And the cheering on and the encouragement of all of you meant the world. And Trish, I am so excited that you're so far ahead, because you don't have to learn all the air traffic control stuff.
Yeah, she's gonna have no problem with navigating any of just go straight to an instrument. So I think that reflects both of your journeys there, and me learning to fly is why I jumped over from healthcare into aviation. I was like, this is too incredible. I've got to find a way to make a career out of it. But I do want to emphasize for anybody watching who is like, please don't ever make me fly a plane. There are so many amazing careers in this industry. And this was a key point that we try to highlight in the report, that do not require you to fly. You do not even have to like flying yourself. I remember speaking to a panel of students where one asked, she really liked chemistry and she wanted to know if there were jobs for her in aviation. And I was like, watch out, all the manufacturers are coming knocking on your door. Pretty much anything that you like, if you like human resources jobs, working with people, helping people, marketing, photography, if you like chemistry, if you're an engineer, of course, there's a job in aviation. And there's an aspect of this industry that just what we're capable of doing, how we connect the world, and what changes and improvements we make on the world is just really exciting to be able to be a part of, even if you don't like flying. I love flying. All the things behind me are related to flying, but
I think, there are so many amazing things that people really don't think about with aviation, all the humanitarian work that happens with aviation. And that has just grown exponentially over the years with the drone capability of, right, Lauren, delivering medical supplies in very remote locations in Africa to being able to deliver groceries here in the US, which is, I think, maybe where Zipline is going. And so learning about all the different aspects of the industry has been phenomenal. And we tried to be very cautious of that and mindful of that as we were putting the report together. It's not just the jobs that you see on the surface that there are movies about, like Pushing 10 or Top Gun, but really there are an underlying ecosystem of a whole lot of additional jobs. So pulling all of the aspects of that into one report was just a daunting task. The two of you did a great job making that into something cohesive. So once we finally had a draft together that we felt comfortable with all the appropriate language in it and all the appropriate images that you had to put together, what was the final process like getting it across the finish line?
The final process was probably the most, well, things happen for a reason. I didn't go to Women in Aviation International because I had an RPAS panel work group meeting, because the following week was the RPAS panel at ICAO, which I sit on. And I guess it's good that I didn't, because that was the week that we started working really aggressively, like constantly, with the designer that the FAA provided to lay out the report. We knew we needed it to look, we all envisioned what we wanted it to look like. It needed to be professional. It needed to, the graphs and the images needed to convey real women doing the work, not, models sitting in a flight deck. And so we really spent a lot of time with Kathy Metzger, who is a contractor for the FAA, that they gave her to support laying out the report. And we spent a lot of time with her, and she was a champ, man. She was a champ, because I do believe we wanted it perfect. And I do know one thing that got kind of kicked out at the last minute, and I'm not even going to share what it is, because I still have nightmares about it, that it's not there. But anyway, it was in it, and then it accidentally got kicked out, the last iteration of the report. But the back and forth with her and the time we spent happened during the Women in Aviation International. So, trying to get that report done and getting ready for our last public meeting to present the report, and getting it kicked over, that timing was a little difficult, but we got there and we got it done. But she was amazing. She was amazing to work with. She believed in the report. She read it and knew it and wants to see real results from it. She's obviously in the industry, as well as her daughter, who is a CEO of her own company in the industry. And they were familiar with a lot of things that we said in the report and had seen it firsthand, and 100% behind on the recommendations, as are so many women in this industry, as we, have gotten emails and phone calls and attendance on webinars and at our industry event in DC, all the outreach from other women in the industry, just basically, what can we do to help? How can we support? Has been amazing. But that last part was, but that's, I think it was good, though, that I didn't go to Women in Aviation International, because we're trying to do the PowerPoint for the public meeting and the back and forth on that. and the report at the same time, which it did take more man hours on the phone and virtually on Zoom, just going line through line and getting all the footnoting right and all the graphs exactly right. And because they had to kind of rebuild everything. We sent over a Word document that the board approved, and then it basically, to be laid out in the program that they use, had to rebuild everything for the most part. So we needed to recheck every single graph, every single number, everything. And we found things, but I think we got there, other than the one I'm not going to share with you.
Kathy was really key, and we all spent a lot of time together, and a lot of time invested in not only the text of the report, but a vision for something that would be impactful visually for readers. And Kathy was really essential in helping bring her independent thoughts on what would be a valuable vision, and then also appreciating and working with us on what we had created in our heads for 2 years, and trying to merge that in a way that was going to create a presentation that was the right way to carry forward this work, and help us laying it out with those representations of all the photos in the report are actual women who are doing actual jobs in the industry, making sure there's a wide representation there. And thank you to all the companies and organizations that provided those photos, because we did not want to use stock images. We wanted to use real women in real aviation careers. So it did get pretty intense towards the end to put that forth. But I think part of that was also we knew at some point we had to release this to the wild, and that was wanting it to do justice to the work that we had all done, and wanting it to be that perfect product, with the recognition that that's almost impossible, that there's always going to be something. That's why I'm afraid to look at parts of it. But I think I hope everyone is very proud of it.
One thing, it just goes to the whole concept, and I say it all the time, there's something new to learn every day. And at the end, Lauren and I learned that, okay, when the FAA puts out a document, they have to, for people that
accessibility.
Yeah, that can't see, you have to describe the image, because they're not going to be able to see the image. And Kathy's like, okay, that's going to take me a full day to then write out what each image is. So woman, air traffic controller in a tower providing services to aircraft. So Laura, we said, Kathy, we have that. And so she took the top of the report and started with the images, and we're live on SharePoint, and she's going from the top, I'm going from the bottom to meet in the middle, describing every image so that could be compliant as per, they absolutely should, compliant for those that are not able to see the images as they're reading through the report.
Is a great reminder on the fundamental premises of accessibility that were part of our report, that at the end we realized, yes, absolutely essential to ensure that, but it's out now. So
it is on the FAA's website. I think we would be remiss, and Trish mentioned all of the women who we represented as we put together this report, but we didn't mention that there have been a number of men who have said, wow, what great work. This is so important. We want to get behind this. We support what you do. We agree that you need more representation in the industry, and we welcome you with open arms. How can we help? And so that's been amazing. Just from hearing that from the report, we had a number of sponsors who helped us put on an event in DC, and 5 of them are actually also sponsoring this ongoing town hall series. Solaris Aviation and American Airlines were our top level sponsors, and then Delta Airlines, United Airlines, and Women in Aviation International were also sponsors of this town hall series. And so I just want to give a shout out to the leaders at those organizations, because you're making a difference and we appreciate you. So any final thoughts. What's occupying all of your time now that you're not working on this report 22 hours a day? And what do you feel are the next steps?
I'm getting back to some of the stuff I ignored when we were in the final stages of the report. I mean, it survived, but you do have to put stuff and say, I'll get back to it. It's going to survive without me for a little bit, which is, I kept up as good as I can, but now I have to get back a little bit more involved in the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers, where I sit on their executive board. And then the RPAS work, remotely piloted aircraft systems, panel work at ICAO, which, as you know, Lauren will say, with the new emerging technology, the industry, you could be on a UAS or drone call every day, all day long, and never be able to catch up with everything that's going on with this new technology. So I'm catching up on that. And then as I mentioned, I started the flight school, learning to fly, and that takes, I want to get it done sooner rather than later. I'm not going to be able to commit a whole month at a time and only that, but I'm hoping within, 4 to 6 months to be able to have my license. So that is taking some time. And of course, my grandbaby, who's always here as much as we can have him here. We like having him. My daughter's 10 minutes away, so we see him a lot. And then we'll get to next steps in a minute, but I hear Lauren.
I am on those UAS calls every day. So I work for Zipline International, which is an instant logistics company, and we're operating in Rwanda and Ghana and Japan. And we announced launch in Ivory Coast and Kenya. In the US, we have operations in North Carolina, where we just started flying under Part 135, an air carrier certificate. We're one of 4 UAS companies to have that certification. We're also doing deliveries in partnership with Walmart in Arkansas. And we are just rapidly working towards further airspace integration and expanding and improving technologies, and just announced our detect and avoid strategies to be able to see other aircraft. So every day is a really fun new challenge. It has been an incredible adventure. The team members are absolutely wonderful and have been very generous in allowing me to balance the commitment, because none of us on this board are allowing the report to just be a report. So one of the obligations for work conflicts is ensuring that we're still pressing forward on the recognition of the report and the implementation. And then, one of the reasons I was able to stay up late live describing documents with Trish on Zoom was my better half is an airline pilot, and he's one of those supporters who was, making me dinner while I was working on the computer all night and making sure I stayed sane during that time. So we're having a wonderful time, both being in the aviation industry.
Well, thanks to both of you for your amazing hard work, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and probably a significant amount of eye strain putting this together. Trish, do you want to close out with the next steps?
Next steps. Yes, because now the real work starts, right? The report was out in March, but we have not stopped, even though we've caught up with our other commitments. The group is still doing everything they can to make sure people have the report, answer questions about it, understand the recommendations, that we have, commitment via sponsors. And we did have a dozen of us go to Washington, D.C., meet with members of Congress, talking about the soon to be drafted FAA Reauthorization Act that will expire next year, and making sure that of the 55 recommendations, 13 of them asked for congressional support or action, one of them being a permanent advisory committee to carry on this work. Because, if you don't have a group that this is their focus, we were very concerned that this will just become a report. We need some entity to carry it forward, along with the leadership commitment across industry and government. So we are asking that Congress make it a priority in the next bill to codify in law a permanent advisory committee, a women in aviation permanent advisory committee. So we spent time in DC, got tons of support on that. We will continue to talk to authorizers in the House and the Senate on that issue. Our goal is to eventually also in our spare time, and none of us have that spare time, to talk to appropriators in transportation, aviation transportation as well, to get the support. It's not a big ticket item, but we do realize that the Congressional Budget Office always scores these things, and we want to make sure that we have all that set up to make sure that we can appropriately provide the support and the work that we need to do with members of Congress to get this done. And again, great support from all of them that we met with. We're going to continue to meet with them. And on the other half of that, Renee is, as you well know, is being where we can, talking about this report. A number of us will be at EAA AirVenture in July on a couple of panels talking about the report, talking about pathways and pipelines into these amazing careers in aviation, and this webinar series, which I think is very important. So, and how do we get those that want to help to get them involved? Is it attending webinars, sharing our information, joining us in events? We will be soon sharing a letter with decision makers across industry, whether it be presidents or CEOs, asking them to commit to the recommendations in the report as we move forward, to recognize these entities for doing the good things that they are doing, and those that have put policies in place to move the needle as far as representation of women. So we will be looking at setting up that annual summit to support those doing the right things, and that will be in conjunction with Women in Aviation and International. And we will also ask those decision makers that are active legislatively to also support our legislative agenda and be advocates for the permanent board and some of the other things that we're asking Congress to do. So if you're a decision maker in your industry organization, whether you be a nonprofit, labor union, professional association, company, or government, we are going to reach out to you and ask for your commitment one way or another, whatever that looks like. We're going to keep on keeping on. We're not going to let this die.
Trish, thank you so much for recapping all of the activities. It made me sweat a little bit just thinking about all the work that we still have to do. We definitely need your support. We'd love you to share these town halls as we present them, to amplify the message, to let us know what you want to hear about. We'll pull in other members of the board, other members of the aviation community, and really talk about some powerful topics. So in order to stay up on what's coming next, we'd love for you to subscribe to our newsletter. You can text WIAAB to 33777. Yes. And then follow us on social media at aviation_women. Hope to see you next time.